Hello, thank you for joining us today for our Texas Holocaust Remembrance Week program. I am Jessica Hanshaw, Education and Curations Manager here with the Holocaust Memorial Museum of San Antonio. We'll begin today's presentation with a few words from Texas State Senator Jose Menendez before we introduce our speaker.
Hi, I'm State Senator Jose Menendez, and I'd like to welcome you to Holocaust Remembrance Week of 2022. I am so pleased to joining students from across Texas and learning about the Holocaust. I also want to say thank you to the Texas Holocaust Genocide and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission, to the Holocaust Memorial Museum of San Antonio, and to all of the partners who've made these educational resources available to schools across the whole state of Texas. In 2019, State Representative Richard Raymond and I collaborated to pass Senate Bill 1828. The bill calls on the governor of the state to designate a Holocaust Remembrance Week in order to educate students about the Holocaust and inspire a sense of responsibility to recognize and uphold human value that helps prevent future atrocities. The bill passed both the House and Senate unanimously. That tells you how important this effort is to all of us. Senate Bill 1828 was made possible because of the persistence of local upstanders who call themselves the Four Ladies in a Car, because of their frequent trips to Austin on a mission to have a state-designated Holocaust Remembrance Week in Texas. They understand that it is a solemn duty to remember the Holocaust and to foster communities of awareness, care, and kindness. You're going to learn the stories of survivors of the Holocaust and about the upstanders whose compassionate actions saved many lives. You too can be heroes by speaking up whenever you witness injustice around you, or create change by working with your neighbors and local leaders to improve your community. I invite you to continue learning year-round about the heroic acts of upstanding. And just like the Four Ladies in a Car, please reach out to your elected officials in order to make a difference. You're always welcome to reach out to me at 210-733-6604. And I want to thank you for joining me today. And I hope you share everything you learned throughout this observation of the Holocaust Remembrance Week with everyone you meet. Have a great day.
As a reminder, we do have our Q&A chat open and available during this presentation, so please feel free to write any questions that you have for our presenter in that space. At this time, I would like to welcome Varda Ratner. She is a member of the Holocaust Memorial Museum Commission and a member of the Texas Holocaust Remembrance Week Planning Committee, and she will be introducing our speaker for today. Thank you for being with us here today, Varda.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jessica. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Lois Ramon, who is a trustee of the Memorial Scrolls Trust and serves as the U.S. representative based on the East Coast. The Memorial Scrolls Trust is a London-based nonprofit which oversees the legacy of 1,564 Czech Torah scrolls that survived the Holocaust. After miraculously surviving, these scrolls arrived in London and were dispersed on permanent loan to caring communities around the world. Lois began her involvement with the Memorial Scrolls Trust several years ago, following a long career on Wall Street as a money manager. She is a master's candidate in the Fish Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Yeshiva University, has an undergraduate degree from Brandeis University, and an MBA from Columbia Business School. Lois, I turn it over to you.
Thank you both so much for that great introduction, and hello to everybody out there listening to my talk today. I'm so excited to be here to tell you about the Memorial Scrolls Trust, which is a nonprofit located in London, and our Czech Torah collection, and mostly to talk to you about a story of heroes and heroines, of rescue and resistance, and not just physical resistance, but spiritual resistance and cultural resistance. So I'm going to share my screen and show you a bunch of pictures today. Hang on one second. Here we go. Let me get rid of all these gray boxes for you. Okay. That should do it. Great. So let's start with some definitions. If I can forward my slides, that would be helpful too. There we go. So who can be a hero? And here in our picture, we have the classic superheroes. I've watched all those movies. I'm sure you have too. So a hero is a person who's admired for their courage and their achievements or notable qualities. And I'm sure we all have our favorite superheroes. Maybe there's even a superhero out there listening to me today. I don't know. I'm virtual, so I can't see you raising your hand. My question for you is, how big does the courageous event have to be to make you a hero? So here we have Mount Rushmore. Are these heroes presidents of the United States? A leader of a nation? Is that a hero? Well, I think anyone can be a hero. You can be a hero if you're helping somebody in your own world or if you're helping the entire world. We have some heroes in our story today, and here are just some of their pictures. Carol Stein, who lived from 1906 to 1961, Hanna Volokova, who lived from 1904 to 1985, and Ralph Yablon, who lived from 1906 to 1984. These heroes are not with us anymore today. And I'm sure you're looking at these pictures saying, they're black and white, they don't look familiar, these are people with funny names. How in the world is this story of heroes going to relate to me in San Antonio, Texas? Well, I'm about to show you how. But let's start at the very beginning, which is, what is a Torah scroll? Because our collection is full of Torah scrolls. A Torah is the most sacred object in the Jewish religion. It's a handmade copy of the 5 books of Moses. It's written on a piece of parchment, which is a type of animal skin, by a very special person named a sofer. That sofer uses a feather pen and special ink and hand writes a Torah scroll. From the beginning to the end, it takes an entire year to write a Torah scroll, and every single one has to be perfect with no typos. They're highly ritualistic when they are written and highly ritualistic when they're used. Here's a picture of one. Normally, we keep our Torah scrolls, which are so sacred, covered up with a dressing, with silver ornaments and bells that tinkle when you pick it up. It's often placed in a wooden box, as you see here in the picture, and that box would have a door that would be closed most of the time. So if you entered into a Jewish synagogue building, you would walk into the sanctuary, and in the front, sanctuary is where the people would pray, in the front you would see a wooden closure with a light over it. And if you were there with the rabbi and the rabbi opened the doors, you would find the Torah scrolls. They're only taken out of the ark when there are at least 10 people in attendance with their heads covered, and there are a lot of ritualistic prayers and songs that go along with picking the Torah up and how we use it. So keep this picture in mind, the most holy, holy object that we have in the Jewish religion. The other piece of housekeeping is geography. I'm going to use the words Bohemia and Moravia often in my talk, and you might think to yourself, where is that? Well, this blue area is a map of present-day Czech Republic, now named Czechia. If you think back to your history class, after World War I, there was a country created called Czechoslovakia. It was actually the merger of 3 areas. the area of Bohemia, the area of Moravia, and the country of Slovakia. And this area was in Central Europe. I've shown you here with the red arrow where the big city of Prague is. That's the capital city. And the Czech Republic is surrounded by other countries. Germany is its western border, Austria is its southern border, and way off to the east is Poland. The little black dots on this map represent 150 towns where our scroll collection, where they were gathered up and sent to Prague, as you'll see in my story in a second. There were actually 400 towns in the blue area that had Jews in them. So 150 little black dots, if you multiply that by 3 or more, you can imagine that there were Jews living everywhere in this land. Not in very big groupings, and other than Prague and Brno, many of these cities and towns were pretty small in rolling hillsides. So let's start 1,000 years ago. Jews came to Central Europe 1,000 years ago, and they were alternatively invited in and kicked out by the ruling parties. They were often invited in because they could serve as the bankers and the rulers could tax them to make revenue. They were often kicked out when anti-Semitism raised its head, and depending on who was ruling, what their beliefs were. So the Jews moved from town to town in Central Europe. When they were invited in, they often wore funny hats. They were made to wear this clothing to distinguish them as Jews. Funny hats, colorful yellow garments, so that everyone knew that that's where the Jews were, and they could only live in certain cities and certain parts of cities. Here on the left, I'm showing you a picture of the old new synagogue. This was built in the year 1270 when Jews lived in that big city of Prague. Now, the Jews were very mystical and spiritualistic, but they were also superstitious. And this picture in the center is an etching of a rabbi that lived a very long time ago named Rabbi Lowy. And the legend is that he could say magic words over a lump of clay and make a monster called a golem. And the monster would rise up from this lump of clay and protect the Jews when the bad guys were coming. And then when the Jewish community didn't need protection anymore, the rabbi could say magic words and the monster would fall back into a lump of clay. Well, the story goes that the rabbi scooped up that lump of clay and placed it in the attic of the building on the left, the old new synagogue. So if you venture off to Prague, you might want to go to that old new synagogue building. You can walk inside today and maybe try to get yourself up to the attic and see if you can find that lump of clay. Well, something very important happened in Bohemia and Moravia in the year 1848. That's when the Jews in the Austro-Hungarian Empire were emancipated and given citizenship. Now, in America, we know that all men are created equal, and if you're an American citizen, you can go to school and you can get jobs, and you all have the opportunity that everyone else has. Well, if you think back to history, the French Revolution was fought so that French citizens could be equal. That was 1789. It took all that time, from 1789 until 1848, for the concept of freedom to reach Central Europe and to reach the city of Prague. In 1848, when the Jews were given freedom, what did they do? They went to school, they opened factories, they moved out of the cities to the small towns, and life was pretty good. They were able to take advantage of the Industrial Revolution, opening factories in the countryside where there were a lot of mineral mines and raw natural resources. The Jews in this area were assimilated. What does that mean? Well, that means that rather than being very religious Jews who lived by themselves in a very small community, they adopted Reform Judaism from Germany. They considered themselves Jews, but they ate whatever foods they wanted. They dressed like the local people. They spoke the local language of Czech and German, and they participated in the national life. In this case, first the national life of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then the national life of the Czechs. So when they lived in those small towns, they lived in houses right next to non-Jewish Czechs. Their children all went to the state schools. They played together. The women were friendly. They traded in the marketplace together. And it was a lot like it is here in the US today, where your neighbor might be Jewish or your neighbor might be Muslim, and we all live together side by side. The Jews were so comfortable in this land that in 1906, they opened the first Jewish museum. You might be surprised to know that museums have not always existed. They started to spring up in the 1800s, and special interest museums like a Jewish museum didn't come about until the turn of the century. So in 1906, the Jewish Museum of Prague was the third Jewish museum on the entire planet. They had 1,000 artifacts in their collection that were collected from some of the old Jewish communities. The city planners in Prague were knocking down old buildings in the old Jewish quarter to make it nicer, and the Jewish Museum opened with the artifacts of these buildings. Everything was pretty good for a while, until 1939. We've read about the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany and Hitler, and this was not good for Jews. So I put here a Czechoslovakian passport from 1939 on the right-hand side. If you were Jewish in these lands in the 1930s, you would have tried very, very hard to go anywhere else but staying in Bohemia and Moravia. Some Jews were able to move to Western Europe, to France and England. Some Jews were able to go to then Palestine in the Middle East, and some Jews came here to the United States. But in 1939, the Nazis invaded these lands, took over Prague on their way to Poland, and there were still 120,000 Jews left behind. Now, I could spend half an hour talking to you about World War II history or Holocaust history, but I'm not going to do that. I'm simply going to tell you the story of how our scroll collection survived the Holocaust. And I'm going to do it by talking about 4 miracles. Miracle number 1. Here you see a picture of Torah scrolls. Now, this picture doesn't look anything like that first picture I showed you, and that's because the Torah scrolls are undressed, they're open, they're unrolled, they're ripped, they're laying on the floor, they're in a big pile of a mess. When the Nazis first entered the Czech lands, they first came into the Sudetenland, which was the landmass on the very western portion of Bohemia, and they kicked the Jews out to Prague, and they set every synagogue on fire, and they collected all the Judaica and made a mess of it. Now, the Jews in Prague and the other cities knew this happened, and they were very worried that when the Nazis came to their town, that their ritual objects, their 1,000 years of history, would be destroyed. So they wondered what to do about it. Whenever the Nazis invaded a country, they always forced the Jews to come up with a Jewish council. And usually they selected people that were already the rabbis or the mayor of the town or someone who had influence. So they came into Prague and they said to the Jewish community there, the leaders at the museum, collect all the silver from the little towns and collect all the ancient books that are important. Well, the Jewish community realized, as in an act of resistance, that there was an opportunity for them to be heroes and rescue all of the Judaica. So they said to the SS officer, "Do you mind if we send a letter saying we want to collect everything, not just the silver?" So the SS officer said, "I don't care, I only want the silver. If you want to collect everything else, that's fine." So they did. They sent a letter to the 400 communities in the Czech lands saying, "Please send everything you have to the Jewish Museum in Prague." Well, that Jewish museum went from having 1,000 objects to having 250,000 objects within a year. And as these big boxes came to Prague, everything was cataloged. The curators wrote down what it was, where it came from, what it looked like, and the Jewish community sent everything from the prayer books to the Torah scrolls to the musical instruments to the benches and the candlesticks. Everything came to Prague. Unfortunately, by 1942, all the Jews in the Czech lands were sent to Terezín, which was the concentration camp near Prague, and from there they were sent to Treblinka and Auschwitz, the death camps. That brings me to miracle number 2. Let's fast forward to the end of the war. In 1945, just under 5,000 Czech Jews returned to Prague, 5,000 out of 180,000. But as a miracle, one of those Jews happened to be one of the curators of the Jewish Museum, and she knew exactly where everything had been stored. The reason I'm showing you this clock tower picture, is that this is a picture I took in 2019. The Jewish town hall in the center of Prague still stands today, along with all the other buildings, because no bombs fell in Prague during the war. The cities of Berlin and Warsaw were flattened during the bombings, but not Prague, which meant that all of the artifacts collected and cataloged still existed after the war. By 1948, the communists came in, and under communism, there is no structured religion at all. Everyone are comrades and everyone is the same. That meant that the Jewish curator of the museum had a very small window to try to save the Judaica again. So she went to the communist officials and explained to them that the materials from the Jewish museum were taking up 40 buildings in Prague, and that she and her friends could move all of this junk to the outskirts and make room for the communists. The first place she went was to the Torah collection, and she moved those big gray bags to a small synagogue in the outskirts of Prague, which was not being used, and she put all of those bags on wooden racks inside this small building. Now, the small building had a leaky roof and didn't have windows, and it snows in the Czech lands in the winter, and it's very hot in the summer, and these were terrible conditions for sacred objects. But nevertheless, the objects sat there from 1948 until 1964, which brings me to miracle number 3. In the 1960s, during the Cold War, there was a giant wall that was erected to cut Europe from north to south to separate the East from the West. No one could cross the wall, and going from one side to the other was very difficult. However, British art dealers were given special visas to go to the East to collect artwork and bring it back to the West to sell it. On one trip, Eric Esterick, an art dealer from London, was approached by a communist government official. I like to imagine that he was tapped on the shoulder, and the official, in probably a raincoat and a hat and sunglasses, said, "Do you want to buy some Judaica?" Well, Eric was startled that there would be any Judaica left after the war, and he came back to London and approached a man who belonged to this synagogue in the picture, the Westminster Synagogue in Knightsbridge, London. And he said to Ralph Yablon, "I was approached, they have Judaica, what should I do?" And Ralph said, "I will buy whatever they have. Let's save this and bring it to London." And that's what happened. So on a rainy Sunday afternoon in 1964, 2 trucks pulled up to this building. Where you see that car with the headlights, imagine 2 big trucks. And the members of this synagogue arrived on that Sunday afternoon to unload the truck. And they started carrying these packages off the truck. They put them down on the tables and the chairs in the first level. But there were more. So they did the same on the second level and the third level until there was barely any room to walk inside that big giant building. 1,564 giant bags came off the truck. The congregants couldn't believe it, and they were so curious. They said, "Rabbi, can we open the bags and look inside?" They started to do this, and they found Torah scrolls that were in tatters, that were ripped, that were burnt, they had bullet holes and blood stains. And they realized that this was something bigger than just one man or one synagogue, and they created the Memorial Scrolls Trust as a charity. They put the scroll collection into the trust with the mission of remembering the Czech Jews that were killed in the Holocaust and the 6 million Jews that were killed altogether. Which brings me to miracle number 4. As soon as the news spread that this giant collection of Torah scrolls that survived the war was in London, letters came from all over the world. Today, we have 1,400 scrolls spread all around the world. We have scrolls in Australia, South America, Europe, Israel. We have a scroll in Mumbai, India. We have 1,000 scrolls here in the US. We even have scrolls right there in San Antonio, Texas, one of which is at the museum, and you can all go see it. So let's talk about our collection for a second. Here you can see a picture on the left of a Torah scroll that's been burnt in a fire. Now, it might have been the rabbi or one of the Jewish community members that ran in to save this scroll. I like to think that it was a non-Jewish Czech who ran into the burning building to save this artifact. After all, in the small towns, the Jews were assimilated, and many Jews were married to non-Jews, and Jews lived next door to their non-Jewish neighbors, and they were friends, so it would make sense that it could have been anyone from the town running in to save this scroll. Here you see the beautiful script writing in Hebrew that's inside of our scrolls. Our scroll collection is very old. Since Jews were in these lands for 1,000 years, the oldest scroll in our collection is from the year 1250 and span all the way up to the beginning of World War II. Now, in Prague, the Jewish Museum still exists today. And in one of the very old synagogue buildings, in the Pinkas Synagogue, the museum has painted the names of every Czech Jew that perished in the Holocaust. As you can see here, the red is the last name and the black is the first name with the date. And it's very hard to look at even this little piece of wall and not feel really, really bad. Well, it's hard for me to wrap my head around the number of 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust. It doesn't mean anything to me. There have been other people who've tried collecting paper clips to represent 6 million, or buttons or beads. It's really 1 times 6 million. Every single one of those 6 million was an individual person, a mother, a father, a child, an aunt, a grandmother, and they perished only because they were Jewish, a crime of birth. The Nazis defined Jews as someone who had one Jewish grandparent. Well, the Czech Jews especially were intermarried, so if you had one Jewish grandparent, it's quite possible that your parents were raised non-Jewish, Christian, baptized. They had you were baptized, and you went to church. But when the Nazis came in, they looked at the records and you were deemed to be Jewish and sent off to the camps. Can you imagine if that were to happen today? Can you imagine if just because you were fill in the blank, someone whose grandparent was from the state of Ohio, someone from San Antonio, Texas, that would be the only criteria by which you would be labeled and therefore treated differently from the rest of the population? In the Czech Republic, there are still a lot of artifacts. So I'm telling you about the Torah scrolls, that's an artifact. But there's also immovable Judaica that still exists as well. Here on the left, you see the inside of the synagogue building in Kolín in the Czech Republic. This building was built in 1642. There are very few Jews left in Kolín today. During the war, they were all taken away. And yet the non-Jewish Czechs preserved this building, renovated it, kept the stained glass windows. Now it's a concert hall. It's so beautiful. It's in use all the time now. Here on the right, I show you some of the Jewish cemeteries. There is a lot of Jewish life here in the Czech Republic still today, even though there are very few Jews that came back because they were murdered. So I ask you, why? Why does this exist? Why are the non-Jews maintaining Jewish life without Jews? Are they heroes? The Memorial Scrolls Trust retells our story to anybody who will listen to it as part of our mission. And every once in a while, we're able to have a reunion of part of our collection. In 2019, we were able to gather together 75 of our scrolls in New York City. 800 people came. This is a photo of the day. You can see some of those big giant scrolls laid out in front of you. They're addressed again. They're revered again. And all of these communities have taken them back into synagogue life, into museum life, so that people can remember the Czech Jews. I thought that that day was so moving, I brought a short video to show you. As the people walk by, I want you to realize that every Torah scroll that they're holding represents an entire community that was wiped out. Now, you might ask me, well, I'm not Jewish. I don't really know any Jewish people. Who cares? Well, let me throw this out there. The Torah is the 5 books of Moses and the most holy object in Judaism. It happens to be the Old Testament for Christianity, and it's the 5 books of Musa in Islam. So while that doesn't affect everybody's religion, it does touch on many, many millions of people. When you watch this, I want you to think carefully about what each one of those scrolls represents. Every one of the scrolls that you saw in this video represents an entire community that was murdered. I ask you, who were the heroes in our story? Can you be a hero in your own community? I think you can. Thank you for your attention today, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have. I will try to unshare my screen here.
Thank you, Lois. So we do have one question that I would like to ask to wrap up our presentation here today. Is this, you can explain or let us know the difference between spiritual and cultural resistance?
That's a great question. So physical resistance is the easy one, right? We've seen lots of movies about people running around in the woods with guns and hiding people. That's all physical resistance. Spiritual resistance is when we continue to practice our religion even when it's outlawed, whether that's Christianity or Judaism or any other religion. And cultural resistance is when we maintain those aspects of our life that make up our culture. So in the instance of our Torah scrolls, that's spiritual resistance because they're a religious artifact, but it's more cultural resistance because it represents the Jewish community and how they lived and their traditions, and reminds us that, you know, even today in America, we talk about bagels and we think that that's a Jewish food, has its roots back in Europe. So it's important to maintain not just your spirituality, but also your cultural aspects from a long time ago.
Thank you. That was all we had for questions. We want to thank Lois Irvin for being with us today. We also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for their generous contributions to this programming. including the Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission. Finally, we want to thank our viewers for being with us today. We hope that you'll consider joining us for more programming in the future for the rest of this week. To learn more, visit our website at hmmsa.org/THRW. And we also ask that you consider filling out the post-event survey that's available on our website after viewing this presentation. So again, we thank you all for joining us today. Again, join us for some future presentations, and we hope to see you all at the